Ladies and gentlemen, the beautiful thing about this game we all love, chess. If you clicked on this video thinking I was going to talk about Uno or checkers, wrong place. The most beautiful thing about our game is that there have been games played in history that we've never seen before that get shown to us and inspire us and all of a sudden make it to our top all-time lists. Now, what I'm talking about today is the battle between Antoni Wojciechowski and a dude named Tilkowski. I couldn't find a first name for this guy. Maybe I didn't research hard enough. Yeah, this dude is like the McLovin from Superbad. He probably just had one name on his ID. Probably made life pretty difficult for him. Also, no photos anywhere on the internet of him. They are playing this game in Poznan, in Poland, and actually Wojciechowski was a really strong player. He made it to third place in the Polish championships in his life. He passed away tragically very early in his 30s from pneumonia, which back in the 1930s, yeah, I mean, I feel like if you got pneumonia, that was not a good thing. And this is the greatest chess combination that I've ever seen. So, the game begins with f4. That's how you already know we're in 20th century chess because, you know, they play wild stuff. This is the bird's opening. And black responds with d5. So actually we have a reverse Dutch. It's as if white played d4 and black played f5, but in the reverse order. White plays e3, c5. So trying to take the center in a different way with the flank pawn, because obviously you're not going to play e5. Now black will probably develop the knights like this, put the bishop on g4, f5, and we'll see what happens. Now, bishop to b5 is a perfectly reasonable move, but it needs to make sense because you're probably going to take and damage the structure, and you need to play against these pawns. So bishop g4. Bishop g4 is not a great move because, first of all, if you even do successfully trade off this bishop, actually white just has a very nice thing going on over there, could potentially attack you, and just has pressure on your center, can attack it with c4, which is always a pretty decent move, and then the queen would hit the knight with the bishop. But, yeah, white just decides to castle. Nothing wrong with that. Black plays e6. Now d3. And now is where the weird moves begin. This is how you know it's the 1930s. Bishop to e7 just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I mean, you should either play knight f6 or knight e7. Knight e7 would actually now get you into a situation where you don't even need to double your pawns. That's a big win for black. And if they don't take, well, then I don't really know what they're going to do after a6. After a6, they have to take, or else their bishop gets chased away, and doesn't just get chased away, it gets trapped. So knight e7, believe it or not, is actually a perfectly reasonable move. The reason I don't like to move bishops before knights is because knights are a little bit less flexible. You kind of know where they're going to go more often than not. Bishops could go all the way out, can come back. You could also maybe even play g6 and bishop g7. Like, you actually don't know. Maybe you want the bishop on this diagonal. Okay. Now, another move I'm not super fond of, knight c3, because that's not really where the knight wants to go. Again, it kind of wants to reinforce this knight, if anything, and this bishop should go here, because you've already blocked this diagonal. But who am I to judge? And now, black violates just about every rule of chess that I know, as I drop my pen. Black plays d4, which breaks a lot of rules because you haven't castled yet. You are not close to castling. Why are you opening up the center of the board to the player that has more development than you? Now, big instructive moment. Right now is the moment that this capture should happen. Why? Because a move ago, these pawns actually stood together. But the second that one of them overextends, what happens now is these pawns are frozen. They cannot come forward. And so what white will do is plant the knight over here, support it with the b pawn, and then play bishop to a3 in the future and stockpile pressure onto the c5 pawn. This is a reverse idea which usually happens in the Nimzo-Indian defense. Black attacks white's doubled c-pawns, but in this case, these pawns are terrible and are totally cradled and controlled, and in a perfect situation, white will even play something like e4, and that's it. This structure is frozen and condemned to death. Having said all that, after d4, white plays the move knight to b1. So white just undevelops a piece, and now black can completely justify their position, but still this exchange happens. And now white has a pretty major advantage. Now, the way white should improve on this position is try to get h3, either a knight there or a queen there. So white plays c3, a totally incorrect way of handling the situation. It kind of makes sense because in the standpoint of, oh, well, if this trade happens, these pawns are doubled, great. But here there's a tactical problem. Black has this stunning move c4, which creates a little pawn grid and attacks this pawn. So if this is always going to fall in a lot of positions, and the pawns are super weak in the center of the board. If you try to play e5, then what happens is I go here, and then I can jump in, I can take this. If it looks like you're just clearing me out, but I have a shocking move. pawn takes c3 with check and kaboom. That is not the greatest combination. That's just kind of cool. We're just analyzing stuff for fun. So this is kind of incorrect, but you know what? I'm not gonna hate. Now we have this trade, and actually these doubled c-pawns are not much of a weakness whatsoever because there's some opportunities over here. Knight g4 is a speculative move at best, but the idea is still queen d4 or c4, bishop c5 on this diagonal. Here, white plays king to h1, prophylactic move. Black plays queen d4, threatening knight f2. Now, white should play the cool, calm, and collected queen e1, stopping all the threats, and now we're gonna have an avalanche of moves coming our way. So for example, h3, knight f6 gets kicked out, you know, maybe e5, maybe g4, g5, I don't know. We'll figure it out, all right? We'll figure it out. But it's, instead, Mr. Tulkowski decides to offer a trade of queens. Fair, understandable. And now bishop to d8, the idea being that you want to route your bishop over here. Here, white plays a move that made me visibly gag when I was looking at this game. Bishop to... Mr. Tulkowski, all right? Why would you give your bishop for this knight? Why not play this to remove the knight and then play this move from where you just dominate this and maybe in a perfect situation get to a position that looks like this where you completely control the square in front of the pawns, knight a4, bishop c5, and then you win both pawns and then you win the game. And then this game never makes it into the historical archives and you don't get posterized. But I digress. Instead, he plays bishop e3. This is just not what we want. Why would we make that trade? I don't... Anyway, he probably evaluated that his knight was going to be better than the bishop, all right? That's not the craziest thing I've ever heard, considering that the bishop's only way of activating is either to get to d4 or to get to b6 and play c4. But white is probably just going to close the center. So, for example, this move, forcefully trying to open the diagonal, isn't the worst move in the world. Probably d4 would have to be played. You would go for this pawn. I would defend it. You would go for it again. I would defend it, and then we would just have this battle for the d4 square. Black plays bishop to b6, setting up this move, and white plays rook d1. That's a very fancy move. Rook d1, of course, is intending to do this, and then the game goes on. Black here plays a waiting move, h6, creating a luft for the king. Always a good thing to do just in the middle of a game. If nothing is happening, make that luft, and you'll never get back rank mated. Both sides kind of... Now will not have a back rank mate. Of course, putting the rook to the open file, semi-open file is pretty decent here as well. Being forceful is still fine as long as you don't lose this pawn. So your pawn is kind of pushed far. So yeah, we would have a big battle here, like rook d7, trying to double up, maybe rook c3 to try to win this pawn. So it's still a very complex game. But okay, waiting move. Now white plays e5. The idea of e5 is you want to transfer your knight into the position. It's actually a pretty nice idea. The computer hates it because it finds a way here to get an advantage. It freezes the rook, and then it does this, and both sides are paralyzed, but black has the chances because of moves like f5, c5, and so on and so forth. I mean, this is not a very powerful rook. It legitimately has no moves. But f6. You're like, oh, you trying to use this pawn here? Let's go, pawn takes. And by the way, if you're wondering why you've been watching this video for 8.5 minutes and you haven't seen a combination, why can't you just be patient? Whoever said it was a combination in the first 10 moves? It's one of the greatest combinations of all time. It's worth waiting for. Right? Relax. Jeez. Anyway. Rook f3. Rook f3 defends the f4 pawn. Not a complicated move. Now black decides to do this, finally. Now here, black plays a move that I kind of hate. This is one of, I mean, my God. I mean, what are we even doing? But obviously, Wojciechowski knew that he was going to play a nutso combination, so... You know, d5, just not a good decision. Why would you entomb your bishop? I mean, you need to keep the bishop's pressure open. You got to go rook d8, like knight e2. I mean, you're going to crack through at some point, like now, right? Now there is no d5. But he decides to do this. They trade, and then he plays king to h7. Rook d7. So actually, if anybody has the advantage here, it's white, because this bishop is much worse than this knight. Rook g3 is coming to attack g7. Knight e4, knight d5 is coming to attack everything. f5, f6 to justify the spin. Very good position. And great move, by the way. This is a fantastic move. Rook on the 7th rank. Keep that in mind for the endgames. Really helps you pressure your opponent. Good move by white to try to trade. Black gets out of the way. Now rook g6, rook g3. We have a trade. And now, ladies and gentlemen, your patience has paid off. because you are about to see something absolutely disgusting, absolutely ingenious, absolutely brilliant. Rook to d2. Rook on the 2nd or 7th rank. Not too complex. Attacks the pawn on b2. Okay? Obviously. Now, white here could do two things. Number one is protect this pawn. Number two is just go for g7. So f5. Just counterplay. And then if rook b2 happens, f6 is really strong. The good thing for white is the king is saved. This bishop sucks. And black cannot really spend any time to attack this because you're actually not even going to take. You're going to push. Oops. Oopsies. Rook, bishop, king. Nobody can stop the pawn. So the pawn just makes it through, right? So that would be nice. White decides to guard the pawn on b2. Okay? Obviously, protecting the pawn on b2. Except it doesn't. What? Oh. If you take, geometrically speaking, there is no way the knight can stop the c-pawn. Sorry, here. That's not check, but it's about to be check. Knight to d... So any move besides knight d3, c2, c1 is unstoppable. So knight d3 would fail to check. That would be the problem. But, rook takes bishop, you do not take the rook, because then you would stockpile your pawns. And after just a simple knight c1, so what you do is take this. A rook cannot stop two pawns next to each other on the 6th or the 3rd rank. It can't stop them. Just rook versus 2, no other pieces. Rook can't stop them because they're too close to each other. Okay. So rook takes b2. So if you take, you have to take. I mean, if you don't take, I mean, probably I go over here or something, right? So you probably have to take, right? So, okay, c3, right? So knight to d3 won't solve the problems, but what if I take the bishop first? And you see, if you take it, well, now you have the same problem. You have doubled c-pawns. That doesn't work. So, shocking move, c4! What? So the idea of c4 is you're trying to sneak through. This is actually the best thing for white to do, because white would be able to safeguard the rook and the knight, and at least have a little bit more fight left in them, although black promotes to a queen. c4 is an absolutely devastating move. Crazy move. You leave two pieces hanging, you shield your c-pawn, you take away d3, and you want to play c2. It's unbelievable stuff. So we have rook b4. Rook b4 tries to get c2, rook c4, and cb just to take. And that's it. You've stopped everybody. But you haven't, because a5! Unbelievable. It continues. If you play rook takes c4, you can't come back and stop the pawn. Oh my god. a5. So at this point, white is like, okay, I gotta save the rook and the knight. I should have done it on the last move, but now I see a way that I can win two of these pawns, and I'm good. Because, folks, if you remember from the last example, after knight takes b2, c3, there was a position after rook b6, c4 right here, right, where this could have happened. Something like this. But black stays with a pawn. White probably didn't want that. So, white plays rook b4, and is like, okay, well, the good thing is that now there is no pawn. I might actually be playing this for a win because the move queen c5 is met with this. But it's not. Because of the absolutely savage geometric tactic, queen to h5 check, king to g1, and this, the absolute killer, the 10-move combination. Foreseen from rook takes b2, 10 moves! And we would have ended up in this position. So white cannot protect. They cannot protect the knight with the rook. It's impossible. So you need to give away the knight. And at this point, you are losing because even though you have queen versus rook, there's too many pawns on the board. Queen versus rook and pawn sometimes could be a draw if the rook creates a fortress. But in this case, g4 is played, the queen infiltrates to e1, and there are simply too many pawn weaknesses. So after g3, black plays the move h5, which I'm not like a massive supporter of this move, but takes in king h6, and here white resigned. Now white could have played on with something like, let's say, I don't know, rook g2 and playing cocoon defense, but sooner or later, I will win everything you own. I will walk in here with my queen and my rook, and with my king and my queen, and I will give you checks, I'll win your pawns, and it will be game over. And so after yeah, after a king h6 and taking on h5, the game simply ended. I mean, one of the most unbelievable combinations I've ever seen. And the cool thing about this is it's not a devastating attack on a king in the middle of a completely like calm position that's about to liquidate. c3, c4, a5. And that is why on the thumbnail I put 3 brilliancy marks, and that's why this is called the Pearl of Poznan, because it's one of the most savage combinations. Perhaps the most savage part about this is this queen c5, queen h5, queen d1, queen a, just unreal stuff. So thank you to the couple of people that have sent me this game over the past few weeks. And if there's any other games similar like this, hidden gems that you'd like me to cover, please do let me know. Hope you enjoyed the video. Peace out. Get out of here.